Good morning to you, Archduke Eduard Habsburg.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's a great honor. In fact, it's very interesting. Let's start here. The Habsburgs. Many Americans will have absolutely no idea who the Habsburgs are. We kind of have a really bad habit of not knowing anything outside of the United States. And in fact, I had my own experience in Pennsylvania. I was visiting with my friends with the TFP, and His Imperial Royal Highness Prince Bertrand of Brazil was there. And I was talking to his people around, and we were just like, I had no idea Brazil even had a prince. And people were just having discussions about royalty, and we realized we Americans don't know anything about the royal families of Europe and even of South America. So let's start there. The Habsburgs. Who are the Habsburgs, and why are they significant?
Okay, I'll give you a short crash course, the espresso version. The Habsburgs ruled over large parts of Europe and for a certain time over large parts of the world, even touching the United States, from about 1300 to the First World War, to the eve of the First World War. They are a family of rulers that was mostly based around Austria. The capital was usually Vienna. But as I told you, they ruled over large parts of Europe. And they were always Catholic, very strongly Catholic. And I think their most characteristic trait is their marriage politics. They had lots of children, and they rather did alliances by marriage than by war or by conquest. So that's, in short, a very nice family. And we are still around. There is about 400 of us everywhere in the world, a few in the States too. And we have a WhatsApp group nowadays. We don't rule anymore, of course, but we our duty to represent the values that our family has always stood for, and that's why I wrote this book.
Amen. And most people will recognize at least one Habsburg, which is the I guess is he blessed now? Is he blessed Karl of Austria? I believe he's blessed now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
wonderful.
Oh, he's very blessed, and it's fun because most people in the States will know Blessed Karl, who was the last Habsburg emperor, only ruled for 1.5 years during the end of the First World War, lost the empire, lost the war, went into exile, and died miserably in exile very shortly after. This is not the kind of person that you would remember from a history book, but he is a humble giant of faith. And for most of our family members, he is probably the greatest Habsburg we had, because he was a fantastic family father, because he lived a deep devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, to Eucharistic adoration. He had a rosary in his pocket. And he really lived for Christ. And you could tell through all his gestures. So, you see, it's not about success in the world. In the eyes of the world, this is the ultimate loser. But in the eyes of also many Americans, as I found out last year when I gave a talk in Dallas, and you had 700 people in that room, and they loved Blessed Emperor Karl. So you don't always have to be successful in the world to do the things right as a Catholic.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, usually the opposite is the case. But one thing that is interesting, one little quick comment. My little sister, actually, she's a professional artist, and she did a beautiful drawing of that image of Blessed Karl. And I just absolutely, so we've recently had devotion to Blessed Karl, but very interesting. Let's start here. You have your 7 rules for turbulent times. This is more geared towards, it seems, just anybody, not just if someone wants to be a king of a country, but in fact, just everyday man and woman. But I loved how you started with rule number 1, that getting married and having lots of kids. I was just talking about this yesterday, in fact, how we should have our investments in our children rather than in this world, in the riches of this world. Let's start there. Why is that a trait or a rule for a Habsburg, and why we should follow?
Yes, you absolutely saw that correctly. The idea of the book is not to speak to princes. So you don't have to be a prince to follow the 7 rules for turbulent times that I propose. But they are rules that everybody can live. that we should want to find these things more in our society today, because many of them have gone out of fashion, and I don't think it's a good idea. And also, we should ask them from our politicians. That's one of the points of my book. So really, rules. You will read the book, you learn a little bit about how the Habsburgs dealt with these topics, but in the end, you should always ask yourself, is this something for me? And of course, the first and foremost thing is the thing that I've experienced myself. I have been blessed with a very happy marriage and with 6 wonderful children, thanks to my very generous and courageous wife. And I've learned that I think family and having lots of children is not only the way to get you and your spouse happy, and the children, but also the antidote to all the woke, crazy tendencies of our current society, of our technocracy. We live in a time where everything, society, advertising, technical advancements, tries to pull everyone alone and without roots in front of a screen, and to glue you to your phones and to the internet and to social media. Family is the absolute antidote to that. Family is what grounds you in reality. And Hungary, my state, Hungary, I'm ambassador of Hungary, as you said, we encourage families to have more children by financial subsidies, but also by speaking publicly about how good it is to have family. And this is something a state should do, because families with many children are the building bricks of a just, good, merciful society. In a family, in a numerous family, you learn every virtue that you need to build a good society. So therefore, I say, get married and have lots of children. Don't stop at 1.5. Don't even stop at 3. Family begins after 3. And I arrived here in the States. I'm right now in the States, touring here, reading from my book. I'm in Philadelphia right now. And I went to a dinner at the evening I arrived with jet lag. And in this room were sitting 3 families who had more than 8 children. And I thought, God bless America. God bless America. That doesn't exist in Europe. That doesn't exist in Europe.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I know whenever I was growing up, I went to public school when I was younger, and we have a family of 6, four kids, and my parents, and everybody was
Wow.
like, "Oh my goodness, you have a giant family!" And then I started hanging out in more traditional Catholic circles, and everybody has 12, 9, 11 kids, and they were like, "Wow, you only have 4 kids in your family?" And it's just a huge night and day difference. But we're about to go to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about rules 3, 5, and 7. I think they're very, very interesting. The rule number 3 is about subsidiarity. Rule number 5 is
Yes,
know who you are and live accordingly. And rule number 7 is
yes,
die well. We're going to head to a quick
very
break.
important.
When we come back, I want to talk more about these 3 rules. I find it very interesting, and it applies directly to the crisis that we fall into in America today. And I think it's apropos that we have these lessons. So check it out. The name of the book is The Habsburg Way. And it's, by the way, it's Habsburg with a B, not with a P. 7 Rules for Turbulent Times, published by Sophia Institute Press. Check it out. We'll be right back. Speaking of celebrating, we have the Archduke Eduard Habsburg, the ambassador to the Holy See from Hungary. I was going to say the other way around and caught myself. We're talking about his new book, The Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times, published by Sophia Institute Press. I highly recommend this book. It's so wonderful, and it really is apropos to the errors of our day. Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us, Mr. Habsburg.
Thank you very much for having me on your wonderful show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We're talking about rule number 3, 5, and 7. In the previous segment, we talked about who the Habsburgs were, and rule number 1, get married and have lots of kids. And now we're talking about the rules 3, 5, and 7. When people want to know the other rules, they're going to have to get the book. But let's start here. Subsidiarity. This is something that is not a part of the common lexicon, something that is more recently kind of developed in terms of our language. But I find this interesting because subsidiarity is the idea that things should be done at the lowest level possible. And this is completely contradictory to the American mindset of what a empire is like, what a kingdom is like, what a king is like. So how is this a Habsburg rule? And what are Americans not understanding?
Well, I'm happy, Adrian, that you pointed out that rule, because for me this is the core of the book, and I think the most important rule for our times. What I found out writing this book was how surprisingly close the Habsburg ideas and the Holy Roman Empire ideas are to what America is built upon. What America used to be, perhaps. Perhaps we've lost it a bit from sight. America is built from the grassroots level. It's built on the basis of the family, of the township, of the county, of the state. And the federal level originally was rather weak. And that's the way the Holy Roman Empire, and also later the Austro-Hungarian Empire of the Habsburgs worked. This was a loose union of many, many different kingdoms, dukedoms, princedoms under one emperor that was not very strong. He was imbued with sacred authority. He was anointed to be emperor, and he swore on relics. So there was a sacredness around him, but he had no real power, not enough money, no real army, no capital, no diplomats. And he just had his authority as highest judge, and he had to very respectfully do this. He couldn't, like, the evil emperor in Star Wars, suppress all the planets in the galaxy, evilly, cackling evilly, and his stormtroopers, suppress everyone in terror. But it was a very complicated diplomatic juggling and balancing game. And it was built on subsidiarity. The idea is that you respect the lower levels. In a union of different nations, you respect the language, the customs, the habits, the rights, the different personalities of each nation. Emperor Charles V in the 16th century wrote to his son Philip II. He said, "If you don't respect the single nations within your empire and all what qualifies them, you will be in trouble." And the same goes for the United States. Some people seem to forget that you are United States. You still are. And in the crisis of the last 3 years, we have sometimes seen that states went a different path than the federal level went. That's the power of the United States. You still have very much power on a local level. Some of it has been taken away in the last 150 years. But this is a great thing, because the closer you are to the basis, the closer you are to the local level, the better you know how to do things. And the Habsburgs, whenever they tried to not act according to subsidiarity, to centralize their empire, to introduce, for instance, one language for all the countries in the empire, it always went wrong. And we live in a time where a certain bureaucratic structure is very interested in centralizing power, in drawing everything to higher and higher levels, away from the local level. And that, of course, is dangerous, because it threatens democracy. Democracy is built upon the idea that the people vote for politicians who will then do politics according to the idea of their majority. But if decisions are being taken very far away from the voters' level, then you get into trouble. That's a central point of my book.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and so much more could be said there. Unfortunately, people are going to have to check out the book to get the detailed information about that. But yes, there's so much there. In America, as many problems as we have, that is one of the blessings of America, is that we are intrinsically a country that is built on subsidiarity, which is an intrinsic good. We are just moving away from that. We need to restore that. So let's do that in our country. Let's move on to rule number 5 here. I love this rule. I kind of want to talk about the rule on the on battles. That sounds way cooler, but this one I think is more important. It says, "Be brave in battle, or have a great general." That sounds awesome. But let's talk about rule number 5. Know who you are and live accordingly. This, I think, is so apropos to our times, because we have a crisis of identity in our country and in the world, of most obviously from the transgender movement, but also in just people. Their suicide rates have been skyrocketing year by year. People searching for who they are, the crazy teen years, people with midlife crises, all of these different things. Mostly, I think, is because people don't know who they are. And I was very grateful for my father, who used to tell us when we were kids, and whenever we would do something that we weren't supposed to, or embarrass the family by acting in certain ways, he would pull us aside and say, "Hey, Fonsecas don't act that way." And I was like, "What do you mean Fonsecas don't? What does that even mean? I don't even know what that means." But it's very, very interesting. So let's talk about that. What do you mean by rule number 5?
Can I just say, Adrian, it's a joy listening to you because the book seems to have been written for you, and that gives me a lot of hope that American readers will really like it. Yes, absolutely. Rule number 5 was originally when I wrote about the Habsburgs. I wanted to make a chapter about their traditions, about how they found who they were, how they established their traditions, for which traditions they stood. Habsburgs are a very traditional family. Sometimes they do crazy and creative things, but mostly they were very traditional. They knew very seriously who they were. Statues that lived in the 17th century knew exactly who she was, from which ancestors she came, what her life was about, and what her choices will be. And they were proud of it. So we live in a time where, as I said in the beginning in our first discussion on family, where internet, mobiles, and our technocracy are trying to make us all single people glued to a screen with the idea that you can change who you are and what you are every 5 minutes. You're not sure whether you're a man or you're not sure whether you can change it. Tomorrow you have something different. After tomorrow you have something different. This leads to incredible unhappiness, to depressions, to people forgetting who they are. And I want to encourage everybody to learn about your roots from your parents, from your family lore, from, of course, your faith, and also know if you're a man and what that means, if you're a woman, what that means. Learn these things. Look at them and say, I will be what I am. I want to live according to my roots. And that will give you happiness, security, and it will give other people stability. This is what this chapter is about. And I encourage you to read it. There is also a few very funny moments inside. But most of all, do it yourself. Do it yourself. Don't be slave to the machine. Do it yourself. Stand up. Be countercultural and live your roots.
Amen, amen. And people might erroneously look at this and say, "Well, my family, we had a lot of bad people in my family, so I kind of want to reject my family." But that would go against the virtue of piety in the fourth commandment. Could you briefly address the issue of, we have bad people in our ancestry?
Yes. Yes. Well, ask me. I just wrote a book about my family. Now, most of my ancestors were really, really wonderful, but a few really, really, really went far off the mark. And well, you pray for them, and you try to do better, because at the time when there were bad people in my family, there were always shining good people at the same time who carried on the values of the family. You have to read the book to see that. And when you grow up as a Habsburg, this mantle of being a member of the Habsburg family is offered to you. You can reject it. You can say, this has nothing to do with me. If you embrace it and you decide, what do these values of my ancestors mean for me today? What do I stand for? And you get even more stability in your life and happiness and really become what you are. So I encourage you, live. You yourself are a poor sinner. We are all weak. So it's okay. You had ancestors who were bad. So what? You can do this better. You can give the Fonseca name a shining light in our times and become an example to others. This is what this chapter is about.
Amen. Amen. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing to think about, especially in our time when there's so much turmoil and rejecting our family lines, of condemning our ancestry. This is so necessary today, just this chapter alone. I hope that someone allows you to take that chapter and just publish it as an article somewhere so everyone can read it. But let's go to rule number 7. This is it's relevant in all times and all places. And recently, my great grandmother just passed away, and so we witnessed this exact thing happening. To die well, we had her old pastor, or actually her old deacon, actually, who's now a priest, came and gave last rites to my grandmother before she died, and it was a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. And so, dying well, how is this a Habsburg legacy?
Well, this is probably my favorite chapter in the book. This is the one that I could have put in the first place, because all Habsburgs very consciously lived with their eyes towards their death. They knew that the moment of their death would decide about their eternal happiness. So they wanted to prepare for that. They prayed for a good death, and they made sure they were in a state of grace by regularly going to the sacraments, to confession, and to prepare and then to be ready when death came. They also knew that their death was public. People learned about how they died, and they took their cues from them. They decided, if the emperor dies this well, I want to be like that too. And so the Habsburgs made sure that they died accompanied by the sacraments, that their people prayed for them, and that their funeral was a sermon. And I will give you an example for that. This is not something that all of us can do, but it gives you an example what the difference between the Habsburgs and, for instance, the English monarchy is. We all watched, many of us watched, the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, like many of us will watch the coronation this weekend. And Queen Elizabeth was a very humble and good woman, I think. And when her coffin was lowered into the crypt at the end of the ceremony with a beautiful trumpet playing, they read out her titles. And it was very beautiful and poignant. But I thought, whoa, the Habsburgs did that better. The Habsburgs did that better.
Well, we're all out of time, unfortunately. So he says the Habsburgs did it better. How do they do it better? Well, you're going to have to get the book. You're going to have to get the book. Go to Sophia Institute Press, The Habsburg Way, a great cliffhanger from the illustrious Archduke Eduard Habsburg. Thank you for being on with us. God love you. Have a great rest of your day. That's going to do it for the first hour. Stay with us. We'll have more Catholic Drive Time coming right up.
Over the years, people were treated as less than human because they were a different race, a different faith, or vulnerable. But over time, we must learn that we are all God's children, created in His image, that all human creation has an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a right to love and be loved. So let's cherish the sanctity of life, because we know how it feels when others treat us as less than